Hello, my name is Alex Johnson, and welcome back to our limited series Fintech Takes podcast, What Customers Want. This podcast series is sponsored by Ubiquity, and I'm thrilled to be co-hosting it with Corey Besaw, president of APAC and one of the co-founders of Ubiquity. Across the first 3 episodes of this series, we've taken a deep dive into the complicated relationship that fintech has with customer service, including the challenges of scaling up a customer service operation and designing an approach to customer service that works for both fintech companies and their bank partners. Today's episode is our last episode for the series, and we wanted to end with a bang. You can't talk about customer service in 2024 without talking about generative AI. We've all used ChatGPT, and if your experience has been anything like mine, you've probably walked away from it both intrigued and mildly terrified about the impact that large language models will have on financial services and the relationship that financial services firms have with their customers and employees. Now, I wanted to have an honest and substantive conversation about the potential and pitfalls of this technology in a customer service context, which is why Corey and I were absolutely thrilled to welcome Aditi Shekar and Mike Forsyth to today's podcast. Aditi is a friend of mine and the CEO of Zeta, a banking app for families and households, and Mike is a data and AI engineer on her team. As you will hear in today's episode, customer service is core to Zeta's value proposition. And Aditi, Mike, and the rest of the team over at Zeta have been working in recent months to integrate an LLM-powered chatbot named Sam into Zeta's existing customer concierge service. Now, the experience hasn't been without its challenges, but as you'll hear from Aditi and Mike, it has also added value, both for Zeta's customers and for their customer service employees. And it has given them, and soon you, a glimpse into this exciting future that we're all rushing towards. So, without further ado, I present episode 4 of What Customers Want.
Hello, and welcome back to the 4th and final episode of What Customers Want, a special mini-series that we're doing here at Fintech Takes with our friends at Ubiquity. Speaking of Ubiquity, Corey, thank you for popping back on for our last episode. It's great to see you. How are you?
Doing well. Great to see you, Alex. Good to be back.
It is good to be back. It is good to be back, and it's especially good because we are joined by 2 special guests, Aditi and Mike. Thank you both so much for agreeing to come on and chat with us. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
I can't wait to talk about this.
I am psyched. I am psyched to talk about this because as we've been discussing over the course of this series, the relationship between fintech and customer service is more complicated than it would appear on the surface. And what we've been trying to do in every subsequent episode since our first one is to sort of add layers of complication onto that. And today we end with, I think, the most complicated but potentially exciting layer of all, which is generative AI. So before we get into the AI-ness of it all, Aditi, I'm wondering if you can maybe give a brief explanation of what Zeta is, and would love to hear it, kind of in your words, just to make sure we're getting a solid foundation for the rest of the discussion. So what does Zeta do, and what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I like to talk about Zeta is we're an institution, a financial institution focused on families. But what some of the ways that I sort of describe what we're trying to tackle is, much of fintech is what we describe as stuck in single player mode, where there's one person at the helm of every account. But when you look at the way money is actually used and facilitated in the real world, it's actually way more multiplayer.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting things to us was there weren't a lot of tools that existed to cater to that use case, to cater to the flows of money that we were seeing. And we got really, really interested in what would it take for us to build a financial institution that catered to that multiplayer experience. And families are super interesting as a use case because they're very high transaction, they're very high trust, and they have a lot of financial complexity that they grow into over the first 10 to 15 years of their lives. So what I like to think about Zeta as is we're a financial institution that today offers joint banking for families and a joint account that can sort of adapt to any shape or size of your family. But over time, we want to be able to serve the financial needs of families across many different aspects of their financial lives, whether it's the legal side, the estate side, the banking side, the investing side. We want to be a one-stop shop for everyone.
Got it. So that is super helpful. Thank you for that overview. The piece that I want to sort of double click into, and it's sort of based on that mission that you just described, is kind of customer service. And I
Yeah.
think one of the things that you and I have talked about before and that you've mentioned to me is this sort of Zeta concierge type service. Can you tell us what that is and how it works and like why it's a priority for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was first starting Zeta, I was very much that customer who looked at my financial institutions that I used at the time and was frustrated by how poor the customer service experience was. You'd get,
Hmm.
you'd have to call numbers and you'd get on this call tree of clicking multiple different numbers to get to the right person. They never had the context about what you needed or wanted. And it was just very frustrating where you're sitting on a call for 45 minutes and you still haven't resolved anything. And so when we started Zeta, one of the key priorities we had was making CX a really core piece of our, and I call it CX, by the way. I don't just call it customer support. I call it customer experience, because to us, it was much more than support. We wanted to make sure that CX piece was really core to how the product worked and operated. And I remember, First Round does an incredible job of pushing out content. And one of the
Hmm.
most compelling articles they wrote that I was really moved by was this story that they told about Backcountry. I don't know if you know that company, but they're basically like an REI competitor.
Oh,
And one
sure.
of the insights that they had when they were developing their own business practices was they realized that their customer support team was actually really, really smart and savvy about what gear you needed when you were going backpacking or camping or hiking. And they actually ended up, once they realized that, leaning into that insight and using their customer support team to actually create repurchase by customers. And it really fascinated me because it helped me frame this idea that customer support does not need to be a cost center. It can actually
Mm.
be a revenue driver for the business, but you have to shift your own framework on how you think about that. And that was sort of the core upon which we thought about CX at Zeta. We were like, what would it take for CX to actually be the best part of Zeta and for
Mm.
it to actually create the stickiness, the differentiation, the highest point of value that the customer was getting from the experience? So that's really where the sort of the origin story of Zeta Concierge comes. And then we moved into, okay, well, if customer support or customer experience is at the forefront of Zeta, what does it look like? And I love the idea when you go and you book a trip at a fancy hotel and the concierge reaches out to you and says, "Hey, Alex, I'm so
Mm.
excited about you coming. Like, tell me what you need. Tell me how to help you. Tell me
Hmm.
what I can do for you." And that was the experience we wanted to replicate on the finance side.
Hmm.
And so that concierge word was really important to us because it really takes it back to that experience of having somebody who's on your side, who's helping you get your financial lives in order.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So drilling in a little bit deeper because that vision you just described is super compelling to me, and that's what I want in every part of my life. But
Yeah.
for finances, can you describe like from a customer's perspective, what does that
Yeah.
look like? Like today,
Yeah.
how does it work? If I contact Zeta, like what's that experience like? And how have you seen it sort of evolve since you started offering it, since it was kind of core to the product from the very beginning?
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of things to think about in the fintech context, right? Customer support, one, has a lot of security implications because, I just read the other day on Twitter that some ex-girlfriend got her boyfriend's banking information and convinced his bank to cancel all his cards, which is a really savage way to show up in a relationship. But I use that example because security is a really core component of really sound customer service in the fintech world, right? Making
Hmm.
sure that when Corey says he's Corey and he has a Zeta account, I know for a fact as the Zeta concierge that I'm actually talking to Corey. The second piece to us, so as a result of that, the security piece, we decided that we were going to have Zeta concierge show up as an in-app chat experience versus a email experience or some ticketing system or some, other system, even a phone system.
Mm.
We were also an early stage startup at the time, and
Right.
the idea of, having someone answer a call at any time of day was sort of chaotic to us.
Async made
And
more sense to you. Yeah.
correct.
Hmm.
And we felt like we didn't always have the ability to have all the information we needed based on the kinds of questions that the customers were asking us to give answers in real time. So if Mike comes to us and says, hey, why did this check not go through on this? We sometimes have to go through 3 layers of support to go figure out the answer to that question. So we didn't necessarily want to give Mike a phone number to call and for us to sit on the other line and say, oh, I'm not sure. We'll have to get back to you on that. Right. And so that async experience helped us solve the security problem and also helped us solve the information problem. That said, once we had figured out sort of how we were going to have the Zeta Concierge, appear in app, one of the things that we are doing, and we're actually leaning into this more and more as Zeta Concierge evolves, but we really want the concierge to be the primary mechanism in which you interact across your entire Zeta experience. So when you're signing up, the concierge is actually like, hey, Alex, tell me about you. Tell me about the person you're trying to open this account with. Tell me about the family that you want eventually to be banking on Zeta. Once you've actually opened an account and it's been approved, we will then even say things like, how can I help you get it set up? I can look through your old transaction data and tell you, here are some of the bills that we should start to plan for, or here are some goals that we think we can help you solve for. So it's that concierge is now starting to play almost like a money coaching role. It's sort of going past the, hey, let me answer your questions, to starting to actually encourage you to start utilizing the product in the right way. And then the concierge definitely, even today, is really, really effective and helpful in helping people when they have problems. So, one of the things that you learn very quickly when you run a consumer fintech is money causes extreme levels of anxiety, and that anxiety can show up in very violent ways when customers get upset. And what we found is that the concierge is often the person who's like, hey, Corey, I see that your check was a little bit late. Hey, here's why we think that might be happening. Don't worry about it. It's going to happen by this time. Or, hey, we see that you deposit or you pulled in some money. We can see it's on its way, but it's not just hit the bank account yet. So we're just waiting for that to happen. So that concierge almost helps customers on a day-to-day basis bring that anxiety level down and make them feel really comfortable with what's happening behind the scenes. Because I think one of the things you learn in fintech is there's so much happening behind the scenes from a risk side, from a fraud perspective, that customers aren't even exposed to. And we, as operators in the space, have to constantly think about.
I think using, sort of a concierge approach as a philosophy is really interesting, by the way. And, Ubiquity works with dozens of fintechs. So we have a lot of kind of exposure to a lot of different strategies. And I would say that, from my point of view, that's a really smart way to look at it, because I think that's a real area of differentiation, that if you look at a traditional bank, let's say, and kind of how they might view support, let's just say it's very different, right? And there's a lot of handoffs from person to person and,
exactly.
Potentially bureaucracy and those sorts of things. So concierge as a concept, I think is really sort of the gold standard approach. I'm curious to know, as you talk about asynchronous chat, for example, how customers have found, that as part of the concierge experience versus a voice channel, especially if there is an issue like a check didn't clear or maybe a disputed transaction where, kind of emotion comes into play as well. And there can be the security blanket, let's say, of a voice. I'm just curious kind of how you've seen customers react in, some of those more difficult situations.
Yeah, for sure. And to clarify, today's Zeta Concierge, like if you went and used Zeta today, the Zeta Concierge experience is part human and part AI. And Mike's going to tell you more about that on our side. But really, in practice, you have both an AI and a human interacting with you. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we are very explicit about, and we do this very intentionally, is we let you know whether it's the human or the AI that's interacting with you. So we've, dubbed our concierge. Our concierge's name is Sam. So Sam GPT is our our AI concierge. So we will say, hey, I'm Sam. I'm jumping in here to help the concierge team with the questions that you have and hopefully can resolve your question. And the reason that we were so excited to bring AI in, and I remember talking to Mike in the earliest days of thinking about Sam, was when we had async chat, we were only able to support customers from, let's say, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. Right. Staffing up a CX team at all hours and on the weekends was just heavy work, and we couldn't support that. And so one of the things we really wanted to do with AI, and one of the key metrics that mattered to us, is how quickly can we respond to a customer question? So what's the fastest amount of time that we can respond to that question? And, if somebody messaged us at 7 p.m. on a Friday evening, the chances of that happening wouldn't happen till Monday morning. And that was not a great experience to us. So we really wanted to come in and say, hey, so many of the questions that we're getting, we think are pretty low level questions. Can we just have an AI start to answer some of those things? Mm-hmm. And that was really the first moment that we started introducing the AI. As soon as we introduced the AI, one of the most interesting things about ChatGPT is it's sort of normalized this idea. And more as, in the months that have passed since ChatGPT has launched, more and more normalize the idea that you might be speaking to an AI. Whereas before ChatGPT, I think, and I'll be honest, I was probably in that cohort of people who were like, is this a bot? I don't want to talk to no bot.
Right.
Don't get me started with the bots, because they were just so dumb at times that it was very frustrating to be stuck in a bot experience. Whereas what's been really interesting about the ChatGPT experience is it does feel very conversational and it does feel very natural. And as a result of that, you're willing to entertain the AI for longer than you were typically willing to entertain a bot. And then taking it further, now that you are entertaining with the AI, you're willing to talk to the AI until you suspect maybe that the AI doesn't understand what you need or is wrong. And at that point, you're pissed. And that's where the escalation goes from, 0 or 1 of level of irritation to 10 level of irritation, which is why we did not feel like you could take the human out. Because the CX experience was so important to us, we have a human look at every response that the AI gives, and we have a human jump in and clarify or add or evolve anything that the AI might be saying, so that the customer always is getting a human, for the lack of a better phrase, a human grade response when they're talking to their Zeta Concierge. Mike, would you change or add anything I said?
Yeah, Mike, jump in.
Yeah, no, that's right. The only other thing is, I think it also became a thing on our radar once ChatGPT itself was released too.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just saying because there were before that your traditional chatbots, and they worked, but they weren't great, and everyone never wanted to talk to them. And there were some transformer models. There was there was GPT-2 that OpenAI had on Reddit, and it talked really well. But it wasn't until they put out ChatGPT, GPT-3 in the form of ChatGPT, it hit a threshold where it's very human-like. It's human-like to a point where it's reached that threshold of like, oh, this is different, and we can make use of this. Yeah, this feels different. Now, some of the hype has come back down. We've realized it's got its limitations, but it does have its strengths. And one of its strengths is an information routing mechanism. So as long as you're passing it the correct information, it can route that to the customer with that plus natural language. It's really good at talking naturally. So whereas traditional chatbots before this were very robotic, without another way to put it, but this is really good at talking naturally and taking the information that you give it and forming that into something that sounds like someone's telling it to you.
Well, so I wanted to ask about that because the thing I've noticed with AI, and I think customer service is a really good example of this, is it's very powerful, as you said. And I do think that GPT-3 and now GPT-4, like it's reached a threshold where it really is capable of things we've just never been able to do before. However, for lots of reasons, compliance, customer experience, security, any number of reasons, there are places where you just kind of picture it as like, oh, now we're skating out over the deep part of the lake where we're a little more nervous about how thin the ice might be here. And so I think the art to incorporating this stuff into your channels or into your experiences or into your products is, where exactly do we draw that line? And like, how do we leverage what this is really good at to solve a point of frustration while also not overextending into areas where it's not good? And I think two things that you guys mentioned that I'd like to drill in on. One is that ability to scale to be always on, I think is really important because, Aditi, to your point, like, I don't even necessarily need full resolution on a problem, but I kind of need you to hear me when I speak, regardless of when it is, about my money, right? Like the fact that, oh, I'm sorry, it's past 6 p.m. on Friday, we won't be able to get back to you on Monday. Like that doesn't work for me. Particularly when there is no like branch or human being or something that I can be face to face with. If it's my money, I kind of need an answer right now. And I need you to reassure me about what's happening and at least give me some direction. So that sort of always on capability makes sense. The other thing, Mike, that you mentioned, and I'd be really curious to double click into, is this ability for it to act as kind of a filter between the human being and the back office systems, right? Where, I was talking about this in a different context with like IVR, but one of the big points of frustration, I think, is I don't want to have to say 5 times why I'm calling. I don't want to have to click through this menu of 6 different things. And it's like, is it any of these problems? It's like, no, it's not. Or maybe it is, but I wouldn't phrase it that way. That's not how I think about the problem I'm having. So the ability for generative AI to act as sort of a natural language interface at the front end makes a lot of sense. And then I would assume, and this is where I'd like you to kind of jump in and explain kind of technically how it's integrated. The trick is then mapping those natural language responses back to more of a defined flow of different customer service actions, different reasons why someone might do things, different responses we want to be able to give, where we want to escalate it to a human being. So when you think about the art of sort of interfacing that brilliant natural language interface to the processes and procedures and systems that you guys had already built before GPT came along, how does that part of it work?
I'll actually jump in here first, Mike, because I want to set some context here. So before we ever introduced SAM, right, SAM GPT, we had the human concierge. And one of the things that we had to build to actually be able to get to where we are today is we built an entire CRM layer on our side that we call Jarvis, who, again, going back to that Tony Stark, experience, is your partner in helping you figure out your finances. And so Jarvis on our side, which is all homegrown and home built, is essentially a layer that collects all of the information, presents it to the concierge in a way that they can get context about you, the customer, very quickly, and gives the opportunity for the concierge to respond, with all the right links and so forth. The other piece that was actually really important, which we didn't realize how important it was going to be, and Mike will explain to you why in a second, was we built a very robust FAQ system. And that FAQ system was something that we paid a lot of attention to. We invest in quite heavily. We audit very religiously. Like, we're just very, very good about looking at our FAQs, because the FAQs actually give both the customer and the AI context about the Zeta product and the Zeta product capabilities. And so those two pieces were very, very foundational to allowing us to actually stand up SAM, because those were the inputs that we took, and Mike can explain how we integrated it into getting SAM stood up.
Yeah, Mike, can you elaborate a little bit on the integration piece? Because that, as context for the systems in place, that makes sense. And I will just say really quickly that any good use of AI that I've ever seen is built on top of really boring work to make sure there's an infrastructure and data for it to work well. So it sounds like you guys were very intentional about building that even before you necessarily knew that GPT was something you were going to integrate with. So that
because we knew we were going to look at machine learning at some point. We knew that these were the foundation pieces, like you said.
Right. So Mike, how does that integrate?
Yeah. So the humans need a CRM tool of some sort. And just to give them, because they can't be doing SQL queries to find all the information.
Sure.
So there's going to be some layer there that they're using. Ours built in-house, we're able to customize it for what our purposes were that we needed. And that information, when when LLMs came around, what we can do is take that layer and feed a lot of information to the LLM, and then have it use that to kind of, when the human's not available, or at this point, be that first responder, and then the human can jump in if they need to, and help clarify. But give that first response of, here's what I see. So for our end, all the messages are sent to Sam. What Sam, we have some pre-checks to lock it and have it not respond if there's things we don't want it to respond on. So if it's a transaction dispute, if it's an image, if it's a couple other things, and something so some regulations around like transaction disputes, we just don't have it even attempt there, because it's like we want to handle those.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, right. So the ones that we're okay with, which is a lot outside of that, it will then. So what you were saying is, rather than clicking through 5 things in traditional chatbots, this is good at understanding intent. And I say that with an asterisk, because it can figure out what you're saying and go try and find the data that will match that. But also it's very sensitive to what you're saying. So we've noticed, as humans do, they sometimes will either type out the wrong thing, like with a typo, or they will type out a different word. So if you say, where's my transfer, and you mean a check, it will go look for ACH transfers instead of check deposits. And so there's a little bit of a routing thing that you have to solve for. Of it's good at understanding a lot of what you're saying, but there's some nuances that it still doesn't always get right.
Sure.
So it'll go through. So with that, it'll picking up at what they're saying. We give it some tools. It can use those tools to look into essentially user data, pull out what it sees, and look through our FAQs. And the FAQs, so because it largely uses the information you give it and what it's been trained on. So we've noticed one of its weaknesses is, and this is where some of the overall general hype around LLMs has come down a little bit.
Sure.
What people have noticed over time is anything that's not in the training data and anything you don't give it directly, it then struggles with. So it's spitting back out what it was trained on, essentially, or what you give it in the prompt. So if there's any missing information, it just fails, and so we try and have it pass to a human at that point. So if our FAQs are what guide that. So our FAQs are essentially like, here's all the steps and all the things that a lot of people are going to be asking about, so you can look through all those FAQs and generally find a good answer across most things.
So you're sort of augmenting that with retrieval from a specific place that allows it to have more context.
Yes. Yeah. So that's in an embedding database, and it will pull from what they said out things that are related from the FAQs, and then it can pull from that and say, this looks like a good answer, and form that into passing back to the human, or passing back to the user.
And we even have a layer of Jarvis that is, or our FAQs that are customer facing, but then that are just LLM facing. So that way the LLM also has some guidance on like, hey, when Alex asks about a dispute, that's not something that you're allowed to talk about. So we need you to back off and say, hey, I'm going to now push this and invite this to, or have a human come in and start to help you resolve this problem. So that was actually really core to the design from day one, because at the time, the CFPB had pushed out some guidance on chatbots and LLMs. And, one of the things that they were very focused on at the time was making sure that the customer knew who they were interacting with.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. Regulators really want to see that, I've noticed.
And for them to have an exit. So if they were like, look, I don't want to talk to you, Sam. I've never wanted to talk to an AI. Please, let this be the last conversation we have. We wanted to make sure that the human could say, hey, I'm sorry, or the customer could say, I just want a human, and be sort of opted out of Sam if necessary.
Yeah, traditional chatbots don't let you out very easy, but we made sure to give like I don't want to talk to you, and it just pops right out and like, all right, here's a human.
Right.
Out of curiosity, have you looked at making customer-specific information available to the LLM to answer, something as simple as what is my balance? It might not be a great use case, but as a simple example, the transaction activity, that sort of thing. And yeah, I'm just curious whether that's something you thought about or how you look at it.
No, that's a good question. That actually is where most of the utility comes from. So ours does get customer information, and we use. I'm trying to think. So when we use the user ID to match to their data, so they can't ask for other data,
someone else's data.
So so and then it will pull their information specifically to be able to pass that back. Because without that layer, it wasn't just spitting out FAQ stuff wasn't super helpful all the time. So it needed to be augmented with the user data. So that was a large piece. So yes, we do give that to it, and it that's a lot of what people are asking about, and it's able to help a lot better with that.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would talk about this is when we first created Zeta Concierge, we thought of it as two bits, which was reactive CX work and proactive CX work. And what I mean by that is reactive was customers would come to us and be like, "Hey, Zeta, where is my this? Or how do I do that? Or how do I set this up?" And that was what we would refer to as reactive. And we were like, a human can come in and be like, "Here's how you do this. Here's where your check is. Here's what's happening to your transfer." But proactive CX was us actually going out to you and saying, "Hey, Corey, it looks like you just hit your goal of saving enough money to go to Italy. How can we help you reallocate those funds?" Or, "Hey, it looks like you just, have new credit card debt on the balance and it has a higher APR than the other credit card that you're using. Should we think about redirecting some funds towards this?" So it starts to bring more complexity in when you're looking at proactive CX. But when we tackled Sam, we were like, look, Sam needs to first just be reactive because we need to make sure we have all of the right boundaries in place with Sam before we even attempt Sam to become proactive. So the first layer was just be better at getting the FAQ surfaced. That was that was Sam 1.0. And it was easy because then we already had an FAQ layer to get stood up and leverage. And so Mike could really get Sam 1.0 out the door in a month. Whereas the next version of that was, okay, now that we're getting you your FAQs when you need them, now let's actually start to instill user data into your context. So you can ask about your specific check. You can ask about the specific ACH. And to Mike's point, because we're a bank account that multiple people in a family might be on, how do we make sure that Alex's 3-year-old can't ask Sam for Alex's account balance necessarily?
Let me tell you something. That would happen in my household. My kids have figured out a way to use Alexa. I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy about it. I don't like it, and I appreciate that because now they're starting to ask me questions about money and stuff, and it's like, no, we don't have any money. You don't get any money ever. Go away. So making that secure makes me very happy to hear. The other thing that I wanted to drill into on what you're saying, Aditi, is it seems like there's kind of multiple layers to this, right? So as you're saying, 1.0, how can we pull from FAQs? How can we just sort of we have a standard set of answers? People always ask about these things. Let's let Sam try to do that. Next layer is, okay, people also ask us fairly easy and predictable and recurring questions that are based on their data specifically. And so how do we allow Sam to have access to that data and to be able to do what's my balance, when's my next payment, blah blah blah, all these different things. Though the next layer, and I think this is the one that I'm really curious about because it's harder, I would imagine, to scale from a human perspective, is truly being proactive in terms of notifying people, right? And so obviously, we've done this in fintech for a long time where we'll have system-driven, rule-driven notifications on different things that are happening. Hey, you just hit this milestone, this happened, whatever. And, we can expose some configurability there to the end users so they can tell me when they want to be notified about things. But I think just to sort of add a layer on top of this, I mean, if we're going back to the original intent here, which is isn't it great when a human concierge can look out for your best interests? The experience I've had both in banking and outside of banking that's the most magical is these sort of moments where it's hey, I noticed something. And the thing I noticed is a little unusual. It's not triggered by a system. It requires a little bit of, almost in a human sense, intuition on my part to be able to sort of surface this thing. So how do we get there without having a branch manager who knows the individual and knows their family on a personal level? How do we scale that using technology?
Yeah, and I actually think this goes back to Corey's question. Like, as we think about giving Mike and I have had these conversations, a bunch of times, which is to say, is there a world in which you build almost like mini models on each customer at some point?
Yeah.
So the LLM understands how Alex works versus differently than how Corey works versus differently than Mike works. And, is there an opportunity for us to essentially use that like micro model to then start to do much more proactive work? We're not there today. That's the full truth. I think there's a massive computational sort of burden that we have to solve for, because the step between reactive CX and proactive CX, the place that we haven't figured out fully is, can the LLM even just start doing basic math for you? So if you said, hey, how is my credit card usage gone up in the last 3 months? Zeta could be like, yeah, based on, the last 12 months of data, here's the pattern we're seeing. We can't do that today. The LLM is not great at math, and Mike can talk a little bit about that.
sucks at math. It's crazy. Like it's for as capable as it is, it has these things that it's not designed to do well, and those interface with common financial services questions and tasks, right?
Right. And that also requires us snapshotting all of that data for you, Alex, specifically based on, 12 different data points that you could ask, or actually 200 different data points that you could ask for. And we have to do that for every customer. So you can just imagine the cost on a computational side that starts to escalate very quickly, even before the LLM gets involved. But Mike, I'll let you clarify that.
Yeah, it a lot of it still is, again, because it's just what it's good at is routing that information to the customer. So it's good at last mile communications. So you still need a lot of that infrastructure to find these things. The LLM won't find it, but it will give it to the user. So you need to build your own triggers first of when I notice something that's out of bounds, like there is a transaction in a different country, you don't live there. So you need a rule system or something behind that finds those triggers. But once that's triggered, the LLM can take that to the user and inform them of the context. So it itself doesn't do that, but you still need to build that system separate, and then it can interface on top of it to the user.
And the way we're tackling that is we basically decide we're going to trial and error this. And what we mean by that is we're going to start with, we actually had this discussion a few weeks ago. We're starting with 5 moments that we call them moments that we think we can basically jump in on the customer's behalf and be like, hey, Alex, I noticed you have a transaction in a different country. I want to make sure that's you. Or, hey, Alex, you just paid off your credit card bill. Let's talk about, or I've noticed you're not paying off your credit card bill consistently in the last 3 months. Let's talk about whether it makes sense to go help with a personal loan. So these are the opportunities, and we're really just starting to lay out like what are 5 low effort, high impact opportunities that we think we can start becoming proactive about, and starting to use that as a baseline to start learning what is it that customers are actually really delighted by, and what is it that they're actually creeped out by? Because that is a very real feeling sometimes when an AI is looking at all of your transactions to come back and be like, wait, you're watching all this? You're looking at this? You're judging my behavior around this? And so we want to be really thoughtful about how we do it without, like I said, making the customer feel like they're constantly being lorded over.
Have you looked at measuring things like maybe customer effort score or doing customer, net promoter score maybe, but trying to understand, how the customers view SAM and, whether it's helpful, not helpful, and on a feature basis, like you said, how do you determine whether customers feel like a certain thing is helpful or weird or confusing, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing is Zeta Concierge is the most sort of discussed feature as a benefit in our reviews and our feedback that we get from our customers outside of our bill reserve, which is like our strongest and most loved feature. And so it was very evident to us that the focus on CX was actually very effective in proving our value prop and our differentiation. That was sort of like the baseline. When we introduced SAM, we actually Mike and I had this discussion where does it make sense for the customer to rate every interaction with Sam to figure out if it's actually helpful or not? And we realized that I think, Mike, didn't we test this for a few weeks, actually? Didn't we roll it out? Yeah. And we realized
it was confusing to the customers.
It was, yeah, they were confused. We were confused about what their feedback meant. And we were like, we don't think this is really working. So we actually pivoted and said, forget having the customers rate the quality of conversations. Let's have the concierge, who's reviewing it anyway, who's reviewing every interaction anyway, come in and start rating the outputs of this. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, we made the rating more robust. In the beginning, it was just like good, bad, terrible. And now it's become a lot better. But that allowed us to at least start understanding the efficacy of Sam's responses. But if we step back even a further level, when I talked to Mike about the business goals here, I was like, look, there's no world in which it's sustainable for us to run the Zeta Concierge program with humans only. So the first question I have is, how much can we have Sam augment the human experience so that we can serve more and more customers with each concierge? That was the first metric that we were really focused on. And what we learned about that so far is that Sam, on its own, completely on its own, can respond to about 30 to 40% of customer questions without human intervention. And then Sam can assist, and Mike, feel free to correct me on my numbers, but I think Sam can assist for somewhere between 80 to 90%. So Sam is not necessarily answering your problem today, but is at least collecting some of the information. And Mike talked a little bit about this. We sometimes have a discovery problem with a customer question, my transaction, I need to dispute it. And you're like, which transaction? What? The Walmart one. You have 6 Walmart ones. Which one? Right. So Sam can assist in some of that discovery before the human concierge has to get involved. And we're finding that Sam is actually way better at assisting than it is at necessarily solving on its own, even if we give it more and more data. And I think that was the point Mike was making earlier, is there are some limitations to what Sam is able to do today. And because we don't want to be in a position where Sam is wrong, that is something that's really important in fintech. We are being a little more careful and cautious of having the human first rather than Sam first.
That makes sense. I mean, the other thing I wanted to ask about just on that front is, how are the humans reacting to Sam on the employee side? Because this is a topic, right? And I think probably Klarna's the go-to example of someone who's being very loud about we can just use AI to get rid of all these people. I find that vision to be a little dystopian and weird, but it is a good question, right? Just in terms of I think about it in my own personal life. I try to integrate ChatGPT and other AIs into my workflow, and sometimes I find them really helpful. Sometimes I find them deeply annoying. And I would like to kind of get a better understanding of, for you guys, from the very beginning when you were talking to the concierge team about how we're going to integrate GPT, how we think it's going to change the workflow, what feedback we're looking for, how we want you to be monitoring it. I think about when I was learning to drive a million years ago, which is a story that won't age well because no one's going to drive in the future. But when I was learning to drive, there was a human being sitting in the seat next to me, and they had an emergency brake, right, that they could push if they had to. But the art of being a good driving instructor is don't push the emergency brake until you have to, but also don't be late pushing the emergency brake. What's been the experience for employees in integrating GPT into their workflows?
We probably have just the coolest team ever. And I know every founder probably comes on your podcast and says that, but we really do. But I will tell you, they were super excited about GPT or about Sam because they were, just think about the kind of questions they were getting. They were like, these questions could easily be answered by just pointing you to the right FAQ or pointing you to the right link or the right page. So they actually really appreciated that Sam 40% of the time is doing that, what they called crud work, instead of them having to do it. And what that allowed them to do was actually spend more time with the customers who needed their human help rather than the AI help. And so they've actually embraced it quite a bit. I will say, and Mike, you probably have a point of view maybe that's similar or different than mine. There have definitely been times where they're pissed at Sam. I remember there was one month where I think it was like 2 months after we launched Sam, or 3 months, like, where they asked to make Sam Employee of the Month, which was really funny because I was like, wow, they love Sam. Like that was like super interesting to me, right? As the CEO of a company, watching my customer support team being like, this is Employee Month. This guy's Employee Month. But then after the like initial love period, oh, Sam's amazing. Sam's helping me, be more efficient and spend more time with customers on their issues. There was definitely annoyance at times with Sam, and there still is, where when Sam gets something wrong, now the team's kind of like, Sam, what the hell? Like, what's wrong with you?
right.
I don't know, Mike, what you change?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's, I think that perspective was their side of things and our side of things, because we didn't look at it from, okay, we're going to replace you. We looked at it from, here's a new thing, and let's see how we can use it to augment what's going on. Because I think other companies, when they're like, great, like we can fire everyone and replace them with this, they're buying into the hype, one, and then two, like, that's not a great way to treat your employees.
It's not.
So, and turns out, you can't replace them. It's a tool. So it will help them, not replace it. Now, in the future, I can't predict the future, but at the moment, it's not at that level at all.
I mean, so the thing I'm glad you mentioned the future, because that's where I want to wrap up our conversation. And I'd actually like each of you, Corey, you included, to answer this question. But the thing that's so hard to predict with this stuff is, what might the future look like, right, as these models become more capable? And even the difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4, like, it blows my mind, right? Like, there's things it can do now that it couldn't do before, and then you pour another $1 billion into building the next version of it, and suddenly it can do things it couldn't do before. There's the O1 version of GPT now that sort of thinks through the steps that it's doing and takes more time. So there's lots of different ways to kind of scale these up. But when you project out, say, 10 years, and OpenAI has raised $1 trillion in VC funding somehow to continue to fund building out these models, and we've built nuclear reactors to power all of the computers we need to do the compute, and we've somehow managed to solve all these other problems. I'm curious if there's anything that kind of tickles your brain as like, I wonder if it could do this, or I wonder if customer service might evolve in this way. And I'll share one of mine just to kind of get us started, which is, even from the early days with ChatGPT, one of the things I noticed about it that I thought was really interesting was it would hallucinate, but it would hallucinate in a way that was very customer friendly, right? Because it always wanted to give you what it thought you wanted, right? So it's like, I just want to make you happy. I just want to like reflect back to you some version of reality that's going to be, I think, what you're looking for. And if I'm trying to get like an answer to a question, that's not so good. However, Aditi, going back to a thing you mentioned, there is an element of financial coaching, which is almost more therapy, which is like, let me just be a mirror that reflects things back to you. And it's not so much about giving you the right answer as it is just like helping you process a thing you're worried about or stressed about or concerned about. And it's the journey you go on in having that interaction more so than it is like, I'm going to give you the right answer, right? Like in therapy, they're not supposed to give you the right answer. They're supposed to just give you the tools that you can use to kind of get to the right answer yourself. And I wonder if we're not that far away from a version of one of these tools being a good financial coach or financial therapist that can complement more of the fact-based customer service and problem solving that happens on the other side. So that's a thing I'm kind of looking at, but maybe we can kind of run down the line. Aditi, would you mind starting? Like, what's a longer term thing you think about or are intrigued by?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, what I'm looking at and I don't think this is 10 years away, but from a regulation period, it might be 10 years away.
Sure,
but I think from a technical period, we're probably less than 5 years away, where every one of your consumer fintech apps is essentially a version of a CFP in your pocket that you can get instant answers to. So, one of the things I've learned I've ended up coaching thousands of couples at this point, because of my journey in Zeta. And the two most common things that they ask me for is, one, to help them understand their options. So like if I bought this $3,000 couch rather than paid off my credit card, what would that trade-off be? And two, to validate what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both things AI could actually be really good for, because the first is there is an objective answer to math problems, right? Like a lot of finance problems are math problems at their core. And the AI could say like, hey, yeah, you can definitely go on that trip, to Belize, but you're trading off on paying maybe $3,000 more in credit card interest. And that understanding the trade-offs that people are making, I think would be helpful. And then secondly, I do think there's an opportunity to then say, and by the way, 50% of your peers do the same.
Mm-hmm.
Or yes, you've saved $20,000. And by the way, that's pretty normal for somebody your age. Because I think what happens is, and I felt this a lot, like I remember, I grew up all over the world. I spent a bunch of time in India. And when I got to the US, I would just constantly call my mom and be like, is it normal to have credit card debt?
Right.
Is it normal to, spend $3,000 on this thing? And I was just like, not sure how I was operating in the world of stuff and what the costs of those things were. And so to me, the way I imagine, and this is why we're investing so much in Zeta Concierge, is the Concierge is literally the only thing you see when you open your Zeta app. And all the other stuff is sort of like numbers in context of the problem or the thing that you're trying to figure out. Hey, I want to go on a date, or I want to have dinner out, 3 times a week, or whatever it may be. And the concierge can come back and be like, yeah, you can totally afford that. Or, hey, you need to slow it down this week.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think that's a very, very powerful vision for the future. Mike, how about you?
I have a little more pessimistic and/or view. I've worked a little deeper.
Perhaps more realistic, honestly.
Yeah. No, I think what I've noticed is now I do want to augment a little bit what you're saying, Aditi. It's something interesting about, and what you said, Alex. It can actually change its personality and does that really well.
Yeah.
So ChatGPT's default is trying to be helpful and trying to answer you, and because they want to, because the company that they're set up to be, that they default to that and they try and push that. But you can train it to be more aggressive on like be rude to you or be a finance
roast
manager
me on my finances. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you can ask it to change that, and it's good at that. Yeah. So it can do a lot of that right now. Going forward in the future, though, there's kind of like a quote I saw recently that I really liked was exponentials. I forget where it came from. Exponentials are just sigmoids in disguise. So it's not an exponential that goes up forever. At some point, it flattens off and plateaus. And you're at the point that it is exponential. You're trying to figure out at what point is this going to flatten off. So what you hear from a lot of OpenAI and others is we're going to hit AGI soon, right? And they're going off of that exponential path, but it's like we're not. At some point, it's going to plateau.
Yeah.
And at what point is it going to do that? And I think we're hitting more of that now. And it's going to be a lot more effort to get further. So I think a good example of this is Tesla famously, 2014, 2015-ish, was like, we will have full self-driving cars in 2 years, in 2017.
Yeah.
It's now, several years later, and they still haven't solved for that completely.
Yeah.
So I think they're saying we'll have all these things soon. And it's like, I don't think we're going to hit that point soon. And I don't know, I could be wrong. Maybe the exponential, we're still going up for a while before we hit that. So trying to guess where that's at, but I don't know that we're as close to, this far-flung future that they keep talking about. But they definitely do still have steps to improve it. The first iteration was training on the whole internet, and that was unorganized data.
Right.
They've been slowly organizing it over time, and that improves the model a lot. So images, for example, was a thing that machine learning models, we didn't have huge data sets to train on. They just pass it everything, but they weren't labeled, they weren't segmented, they weren't anything else. But now, 10, 15 years later, painstakingly, humans have gone through and labeled huge data sets of images and everything that's in it, put segment masks, put all of these things. And then now when it trains on that, it's really good with images now. So I think that the data sets now are at that unorganized stage. And over the next 5-10 years, humans are going to go dig through basically the whole of the internet and label every single thing and organize it in a way that's going to train it a lot better. So models are going to certainly get better for the next several years as they do that. But at what point they become like AGI level of like things. I don't know how close we are to that. So there's still some improvements to be made, and we'll see how far they go in the future.
It's funny to imagine that OpenAI raises $6 billion, and really what they're actually spending that on is just a bunch of humans crawling through the internet, better categorizing
labeling
the data.
things. Yeah, exactly. That's what it is.
Like it's all this stuff is so
first
more
time
mundane.
is always handmade.
Right.
Always handmade.
Right. Yeah. Eventually, it all works great, but turns out, we forgot to label these things. Corey, I'll give you the final word on this question, and really just for customer service and fintech, as this is our last episode. But how would you sort of frame out the future?
Yeah, well, look, first I would say I think there's a difference between what can be done and what should be done. And I think that's true both now and in the future, right? And so, I think there's no question that technology broadly, not just GPT, models, but, a lot of different technologies will continue to evolve, continue to become more powerful, and will continue to create, ever more options for how you might deal with any number of things, including customer support of a fintech program, right? To me, the way that, when I'm talking to my customers and when we're working on kind of looking holistically at what a support program looks like, we really think that you have to look at things like customer friction and customer expectations, measure things like customer effort score, and ask customers to say, how easy is it to work with your organization? And probably A/B test things, right? And that's where I say, just because it can be done doesn't necessarily mean it should be done. That's where you can kind of test a feature out and say, what do customers actually think of this? Do they like it? Do they not like it? And I think the best organizations are going to be guided by that philosophy and will, put technology in place where it makes sense, where it makes business sense, also thinking about risk management and that sort of thing, and makes sense for customers. I think looking back, at IVR, which was one of the kind of early iterations of technology, or ATM machines as well, an early iteration of self-service, there were a lot of pronouncements of this will make humans entirely irrelevant, or customers will absolutely hate this. And neither of those things are entirely true, right? There's a set of use cases for which both of those technologies make great sense and for which they don't make great sense. And I think chatbots were a similar story. And I think that, GPT is yet another similar story. I think at its best, GPT creates a better customer experience that reduces friction, even when humans are still involved in that experience. A use case that we use very frequently, especially in voice interactions, where it's a little bit more difficult to directly have a GPT model interface with a customer. It's possible, to be clear, but there's some difficulty and some more reasons why you might not want to do that. It's still something that works really well for summarizing a lot of disparate facts for a human, right? Whether that's frequently asked question material or giving access to account level information to help an agent better understand quickly patterns. And we use that a lot, like in the dispute investigation process as well, for example, where you're trying to determine, whether fraud did or didn't occur. You probably don't want to use a GPT model to make that determination, but what you can do is help an agent summarize a lot of disparate information. And I think those are all examples of where you can make a customer experience better, and you can make things better on the business side for an organization. And so, I guess that's kind of it. My closing thought here would be that it's a really powerful technology, but just like chatbots before it, or IVRs or anything else, it's one that shouldn't be jammed in front of a customer, just, even if that's not what they're looking for. But when used intelligently, a lot of customers love ATM machines. A lot of customers actually do like using IVRs for situations where they make sense, and liked chatbots as well. And I think this is no different.
Yep, I completely agree. And despite what the longshoremen in the U.S. are trying to accomplish right now, we can't stop the progress of this stuff. So we should figure out the right way to use it. That is a great place to end. Mike, Aditi, Corey, thank you all so much. This was a really fun conversation. I enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for What Customers Want. We hope you enjoyed the series and gained some valuable insights into the customer service challenges and opportunities facing fintech. If you enjoyed the series, please share it and keep this important conversation going.